passing traffic. No, let's go. Fine. You came in between takes. So we'll let you know when we're done, but we shouldn't be too long. Cool. Hey Internet beer lovers, welcome to the first Fourpure at 4 of 2018. I'm John, the head brewer here at Fourpure. I hope you guys had a really happy holiday period. I know there are definitely a few sore heads here around the brewery today, and I hope you guys have recovered okay. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about 10 tips that I have for the home brewers that are out there. I've got some beginner tips, some intermediate tips, and some more advanced. Be informed. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, but the best thing to do is to go to a trusted source. I really recommend the book How to Brew by John Palmer. It's a really handy resource that covers everything from a beginner to a relatively advanced level of homebrewing. Always use the best, freshest ingredients. So when you're thinking malts, you know, if you're making a Pilsner, use really good German Pilsner malt. If you're making some kind of ale, use a really good British ale malt. It's also fun to blend base malts together though. I really like, for instance, using a combination of a more bready, sort of British ale style malt with a more clean, crisp German Pilsner that can combine really well in different ways. Generally speaking, blending base malts is a good idea and is quite a fun way to make a beer a little bit more complex, but without having to do a whole lot more work. It's also really important to really master your ingredients, to really know them really well. So for instance, you can brew a beer that has just Munich malt and Citra hops. Then you're really going to know Munich malt and you're really going to know Citra as a hop. You can then maybe do a tweak on it next time and add a second hop to it and get to know that hop too and how it combines with Citra. A hop combination I really like is Citra and Mosaic or Amarillo and Simcoe. The other way to do this is to brew one beer and split it into multiple smaller batches, so you can use different yeast strains or you can dry hop in different combinations. It's a great way to have a common baseline and for you to really, really learn how individual ingredients interplay and really get to know them properly. Really important to store the ingredients too. Why would you spend all that money on the best raw materials only to let them get wasted by not looking after them properly? So that means storing your hops in the freezer. It means properly sealing your bags and making sure of malt and making sure no moisture gets to them, especially if it's pre-crushed malt. Keep your yeast in the fridge. Speaking of yeast, there's a lot of really good dry yeast out there. If you are going to use it, make sure that you rehydrate first. That's really critical. And liquid yeast also really needs to be stored and used fresh. This is a cliche, of course, but hygiene. Cleanliness is everything in brewing. All of our equipment is especially designed for being able to be easy to clean and to sanitize, and we really put such a big focus on hygiene here at the brewery. It's why we spent all this money on this beautiful brewing lab, so we can do all the microanalysis on all of our beers. Any kind of beer spoilers that get into your beer will just ruin the whole batch, and what's the point of that? You know, you put all that effort into the brew day and then your bottling and all that, only for the beer to taste bad because you decided not to wash your hands when you should have. Just spend the extra money on the really good chemicals. The no-rinse chemicals are better. It's really worth it. The last thing you want is to have an infected beer that tastes gross. So hygiene is king. Control your temperatures. Obviously, homebrewers know about the importance of mash temperature, but I think that pitching temperature and fermentation temperature are probably more important. So we like to pitch our ales between sort of 16 and 18 degrees Celsius, and to ferment them between sort of 18 and 20 Celsius. We like to pitch our lagers between 8 and 9 degrees Celsius, and to ferment them sort of between 10 and 11 degrees. And that's us, that's what we do. And it'll depend on what yeast strain you're using, but it's really important to have that control if you want a really clean fermentation character. So don't pitch too warm and really keep the temperature under control somehow. You know, there are different ways you can do that at the home scale, but I really, really want to emphasize how important that is. You put all that work into the brew day, and you know, you pitch your yeast, and then everything can still go wrong because of a poor fermentation. Pitching rates. So it's sort of similar to number 4 in that it's related to how good the fermentation is. Again, you put all that work into making the wort on your brew day. Let's not ruin it by having a bad fermentation. Pitch the right amount of healthy, active yeast. So if you're going to use dry yeast, you know, use a pitching rate calculator. Figure out how much yeast you need to pitch. If you use liquid yeast, do a yeast starter. And you know, if you're a lab geek, buy yourself a microscope and do some cell counting. There are great guides online you can read about how to do that. But pitching the right amount of yeast is key. So we pitch the right amount of yeast for every single brew that we do, and we have tight specs for how much yeast we pitch to every single batch. We do cell counting on every batch, and it really helps with having that kind of clean and consistent and rapid fermentation with healthy yeast that you can then even harvest and reuse to save yourself money for the next beer. So number 6, I think most homebrewers have hydrometers or maybe even refractometers to check the beer density or the wort density. I would recommend also buying a pH meter. At a bare minimum, just knowing what your mash pH is and being able to adjust on the fly to stay in the optimum pH range in your mash is pretty important to create the best possible tasting beer. Tracking your pH sort of throughout the process. So your mash pH, your first runnings, your last runnings, your pre-boil, your post-boil, and then during your fermentation. It's really interesting and really important data. We track that for every single beer, every single day, and we again have pretty tight analytical targets for what our beer is supposed to be. It really has a big impact on how the final hop expression is perceived, how refreshing the beer is, what the beer flavor is like. You know, you have to understand your water profile. You have to have the right kind of water profile to brew the beer that you want to brew, and that's pretty important. But I think that the first step is just get that pH meter and then figure it out from there. You want to have a mash pH between sort of 5.1 and 5.5. A little below and a little above won't hurt you, but you know, being 5.2, 5.3 is really best. And then just seeing that small drop down to sort of 5 pH at the end of the boil is really good. And then at the end, the final beer should be between sort of 4 and 4.5. And if you're in those ranges, then you're doing something right, and that's good. You know, water chemistry in brewing is pretty complicated stuff. You don't have to be an expert. I think the key thing at this stage when you're home brewing is to just understand what the pHs are supposed to be, and then you can look for little solutions to make sure that you end up in the right range. Keep it simple. A lot of home brewers really overthink and even overdo the whole recipe creation side especially. I think that every ingredient that you include in your beer has to be justifiable. You have to have a clear, valid reason for including that one specific malt. You know, if you're making a 7% double IPA, does it really need to have that biscuit malt in there? Maybe it does. Maybe you love biscuit malt, but you have to be able to justify it. I think simpler recipes are very often better. Limit yourself, as an experiment, try to limit yourself to like 3 to 4 malts and maybe 2 to 3 hops for a few recipes in a row. Think about the recipes that you have and that you think work well, but maybe aren't quite right yet. Go through each ingredient, think about how you would simplify it, how you would tone it down just a little bit, and I promise you, you probably will be making a better beer. Be creative. I think one of the best things about home brewing, it's such a great hobby, is that you can brew whatever you want. You can brew whatever you want to drink. And you don't have to worry about appealing to more people or having to, you know, sell it to pubs or anything like that. You can brew literally anything in the world, and you should enjoy that and take advantage of it, and to use unique flavors and flavor combinations in different ways. One of the things that I enjoy the most about home brewing is definitely that aspect, the fact that I can brew really small batches of something interesting and something unique, and that'll often inspire me to develop something here at work. So especially when you're traveling, when you're somewhere new, somewhere different, you're tasting different things, you're trying the local beers or maybe even the local wines or the spirit and the local food obviously as well. Where does that take your imagination? Where does that take? And really think about that. Challenge the boundaries of beer. I think one of the great things that home brewing, the rise of home brewing has done across the world for the past 25 years or so is to inspire, you know, a whole generation of brewers to be really innovative and creative and interesting. A creative spark is so important within the home brewing community, and I think that to just try to imitate what happens on a commercial scale is kind of a shame, really. I think the best homebrew is always the most interesting homebrew. Point number 9 is to oxygenate your wort. A lot of homebrewers have to sort of make do with just aerating by shaking. That's really not going to be good enough to make the best beer possible. I think that you should get a small oxygen cylinder, aeration stone, and really try to dial in how much oxygen you're using. It's really important for yeast health, for fermentation. You know, it's kind of like the thing about the hygiene and about the fermentation and pitching temperatures. If you're putting all that hard work into designing a recipe, buying the ingredients, making the wort, you know, do the next most important thing, which is make sure you have a really perfect fermentation. And one of the key things there for yeast health is to use sufficient oxygen. Okay, and point number 10 is to trust yourself and not to be too hard on yourself. It's to trust your palate, really. It's okay if not every single batch tastes exactly like how you wanted it to, as long as it's, you know, somewhat drinkable. The main thing is that you're always learning, that you're always getting better. The more you brew, the more you practice, the more you taste, the better you're going to get. You know, in the words of Charlie Papazian, relax, don't worry, and have a homebrew. Next week we're going to talk about how here at Fourpure, how we decide which beers we're going to brew and when we're going to brew them. We have a whole process around that. We have a beer calendar that we put out every single year. Like I mentioned, we're going to brew about 60 unique beers this year. So there's a lot of thought and creativity that goes into that. So I'm going to share some of that with you next week. But for now, please like, subscribe, share, send in your questions or your comments. Have a great weekend. All right, one last thing. I completely forgot. We did some kind of Instagram competition or something I know nothing about, but I am told that I have to draw the winner, or the 3 winners. So let's go next door and do that now. Okay, we're next door now for the big announcement. Again, I don't really know what the competition is. I understand it's Instagram, maybe Facebook too. I don't know what you guys had to do in order to be, you know, valid entrants into the competition, but I'm gonna pick 3 winners. So all the names are in here, in this crowler. Let me see. 3rd place, P. Frogly. P. Frogly, P-F-R-O-G-L-Y. P. Frogly, congratulations, 3rd place. Okay, Jake Middleton Brown. Congratulations, Jake, if that's your real name. 2nd place to Jake Middleton Brown. Amy Carter. Amy Carter, the big winner today. 1st place. Congratulations, Amy. I don't know what you win, but I'm sure it's lovely. Congratulations again, and thanks for joining us at Fourpure at 4.